So you've done a series of stories on dirty schools,
Yes.
And there's been like at least four or five, six stories that you've done as a follow-up, and a lot of people are overwhelmed hearing about these rat droppings, dirty floors, expired food, and they're kind of appalled. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you got the idea to do this story. I understand that there was a school last year that had failed health inspections in
Yes.
Bronzeville, and I was wondering if that is what got you started or got you interested in learning about, the cleanliness of schools in the Chicago public school system.
So that rat and mouse, and we'll call it a rodent infestation
Yes.
at Mollison Elementary School, was a catalyst for digging into this as much as I did at this time. But I'll say that over the last 4.5 years that CPS has privatized the management of its cleaning services. I've been hearing lots of complaints. So it's kind of something I've had my ears open for a really long time, because there have been lots of complaints about the conditions of schools. But in November and in early December, when Mollison just had all the poop in it, and it's an elementary school, little kids. Tips started coming in. I began asking for documents I thought would, just sort of get at what's going on with the cleaning contracts, what's going on in the schools. And then I came upon a word, blitz, that
Where did you see that word?
got these schools, got these stories going in earnest. People started to call, and
Were these janitors that worked at the schools?
I mean,
or
I'm never going to tell you where my tips came from, but the phone, which rings from time to time about these kinds of things, started ringing more and more about something is going on. CPS is looking at the schools themselves, and blitz was such a great word, like it made for a really easy freedom of information request for public records, to get the inspections and then to get some emails from a couple people at the top of CPS that I thought could be helpful. Of course, with CPS, it took forever to get any of this stuff back. It took a couple of months. But when they finally gave me the inspection reports, I started to read through them and make lists of things, and couldn't believe some of what I was seeing that CPS's own inspectors had found and documented in really great detail. So again, like more lists, more comparisons, adding it all up, we figured out that they got to 125 of their schools whose cleaning services were managed by the private company Aramark, and of the 125, 91 of them failed. 91.
That was
failed.
the number that came out, and then you had a lot of pictures in your stories that
Yes.
kind of illustrated the problems in these schools.
Right.
Were these pictures part of the reports that you got?
Yeah, they were. I mean, they were an extra public records request, but yeah, they were things. They were photos that the inspectors took at some of the schools, to document what they saw.
When were these inspections done, and what was the reaction to them? Did you have a lot of parents being like, "Oh, we've been seeing this like for a long time," or was it something that, it shocked a lot of people, like that might have not have had children in these schools?
Yep.
And these were mostly in the south side and the west side, correct?
There were a lot on the south side, but no, there were several on the north side too. I would say the worst of them were definitely in south side schools, but a couple of other awful ones were up north too. So it was spread out a little bit. The inspections were conducted from like mid-December until the very beginning of February, which was about a week after I started asking for the reports. It was like 6 weeks, 7 weeks. Here's the thing about parents, like these inspections were done at their schools. The principals knew because the principals had to let everybody in, but parents weren't told that the inspections were happening, and parents weren't being told of the results of the inspection. So the first time parents learned about what the inspectors found was when we put them all up on our website.
Wow.
Yeah.
So,
And then we broke the story during spring break, which just was a coincidence. There was nothing specific about it. So it took more parents until kind of the next week to get back to school and read through the reports themselves. And yeah, again, like the phone started ringing.
did you get a lot of emails from parents just furious?
I mean, social media blew up about this, yeah, and there were lots of folks who were like, man, I told you so. Like, parents who'd been turning up to board meetings for years, students who'd been turning up to board meetings for a long time. I mean, their sense was like, we knew something was up. Here it is in black and white, you know.
What was the reaction to the Chicago Public Schools officials?
There's
definitely some reaction that they had.
No,
correct?
there has been some reaction, and part of that, so the folks who are now in charge of Chicago Public Schools, who are not necessarily the same folks who were in charge in December, are, you know, totally on the offense here. They get a new chief operating officer who was a former board member. I mean, he's super familiar with how CPS works, this guy named Arnie Rivera. So he has been all over, like, we're going to fix this, and here's how we're going to fix this. It wasn't his idea to do the blitzes. That was under the former CEO, Forrest Claypool. So Arnie kind of inherited this mess, and so did Janice Jackson, who's now in charge, but it is now completely on them to straighten all of this out, and they seem to understand that really well. So, you know, one of the more curious reactions really came from the mayor, who came out right away really strongly and said he was beyond outraged that kids had to go to school under these conditions, and he too was saying, like, my people are going to figure this out.
So it's really interesting. And they added, wasn't there a CPS contract, $70 million more going into this, or there's some more money that they're pouring into this program or into the contracts, correct? More janitors, because that was one of the complaints, right? That the janitors said that they're short-staffed.
Yes. So the janitors that do most of the cleaning at CPS, and I'm trying not to get too technical here, because as with everything in the schools, like, it gets complicated fast, but the bulk of them belong to a union that is part of the investor group that owns our newspaper and our company. I should say that out loud. They said that some of the problems were that when these private companies took over, yeah, they let a lot of people go, and that's how they saved money, as they promised CPS that they would. So they threatened a strike, and really soon thereafter, CPS promised that they'll hire back permanently 100 of these custodians, and that they're going to do like some super deep cleaning over the summer, hoping that, like, if it's like my house, if I scrub the house on Saturday or Sunday, like by Friday or Saturday, maybe it's not a total disaster anymore. So they're hoping to do that over the summer. But yeah, no, it's going to cost them $7 million, and the district's going to pay for it, not the companies.
And you had a lot of these janitors come and speak with you, right? They were talking about how they were kind of given a heads up before these blitzes, and it was kind of like everybody started scrambling and trying to clean the place up.
And that was one of the crazier parts of this whole, you know, just all of this reporting so far. And I had also been hearing those rumors for a while too. But basically, anytime anyone went to the Board of Education to complain to CPS about bad conditions in a specific school, district officials turned to a separate set of inspections that were required in the contracts, that were done by like a third-party auditor, an independent guy, and they would say, but everybody's passing those audits, so we don't, you know, we'll take a look at your school, but basically this cleaning program is working really well. After the dirty school stories started coming out, you know, I talked to the janitors about, well, how do you think that is? How are they passing these audits if you're saying the conditions on the ground are as bad as you're saying they are? And they said, well, we knew about the audits. I mean, our bosses would tell us. And then we would get supplies that we'd been asking for all along, would turn up all of a sudden, and sometimes extra bodies would turn up. And I mean, we'd be doing all kinds of activity in the couple of days leading up to the auditor coming. Also, we kind of knew where he was going to go.
So it's extra cleaning there. And then some people bring their own cleaning supplies as well?
Some janitors have said, I mean, I've heard of this from teachers too, like people just wanted these schools clean for kids, little kids.
Yeah.
So no, they did what it they did what it took to make sure their schools were clean. So that, you know, the janitors were saying that basically these inspections were set up. In the last couple of months, CPS quietly again changed the way it does the inspection. I ended up getting the auditor on the phone, and he explained that in the last couple of months, like late last fall, CPS changed the way that it agreed to change the way that it did these audits. So before, they used to evaluate your school in a point system. So you got so many points for each area of your school, and they all added up to a total. So in theory, you could fail kitchen, you could fail bathrooms, but if you got enough points everywhere else, you could pass the whole inspection. They changed it so that now if you fail one of a couple of key areas, classrooms, I think the lunchroom and bathrooms, which is where kids spend most of their time and like, which could potentially be like the germiest, you automatically fail the whole inspection no matter what else your school looks like. So, and it was funny too because CPS ran numbers for like both models, and if they'd stuck with the old point system, their pass rates would have been super high, like 9 out of 10 schools passing. But under the new way, it was more like high 70% or like 80% of schools passing. So clearly, some schools were passing all along that you would not consider clean.
Have there been any indication that the kids have gotten sick from these rodent droppings, expired food, from the dirty schools? Has there been any indication that any kids have been sick because of this?
Right. I don't yet know. And I'm waiting for those phone calls to come in. So if anybody is watching this and your kids did get sick and you think that's why, I mean, please, 312-321-2152. I would like to talk to you. I don't know, though, is the truth.
And you've been covering education for how many years?
For 5.5 years.
5.5 years.
Yeah.
So, you've been a beat reporter, and that's one of the things I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with journalism understand about beat reporting is that you're doing this day in and day out, and it's sometimes mundane. But do you think you got this story because you're an education reporter and people know who you are? Can you talk a little bit about that and beat reporting and how it kind of helps you get to know people and they get to know you?
300% this was beat reporting. I don't think this was a story that anybody could have just parachuted into and gotten. I mean, it just took, the thing about beat reporting is you learn a little bit at a time how a whole system works, and then you learn how it's supposed to work and how it's not supposed to work. And then, when something different is going on, you know that it's different than it used to be. And then, people get to know who you are and they see your name in the paper and you write one time about a cleaning contract and somebody will call with a tip that maybe means something at the time and maybe it doesn't. And then, as a beat reporter, I routinely ask for documents from the school district about money that they're spending and copies of contracts. So when I got to this point where I heard the word blitz and knew I need to look at these blitzes, I already had so much back knowledge of what these companies were already supposed to do, and some of the problems from before. And I knew parents who had been complaining at meetings because I had their names in my contacts. And I just feel like beat reporting is how most good stories, most good enterprise stories come about, where you, the reporter, are kind of setting the agenda and deciding what it is that we're going to look at and talk about. But it's hard to just have an idea in your head and see it to fruition. And there are talented people who manage to do that, but I just can't say enough good things about the beat reporting. You remember when you were...
Yeah, just being at the courthouse, people trust you. They see you walking in the courthouse day in and day out, and then they realize that you're someone that they can trust, and they tell you about stories. Right. So that's what I was going to say. Do you think that you would have gotten the story if you were just covering something else? So I think that's one of the things people don't understand. And you know where the records are, you know how long it takes for, reports to come out. Yes. And that's how it was for me at court hearings. I know when somebody would parachute in, they would be always so shocked and overwhelmed at how long it took a case to go to trial. But I explained to people who came in, because, there are stories and there are longer form stories, but I said, it's kind of like the average. And so, you kind of know how things work.
Right.
And so you probably know how the Chicago public school system works, how they work with their records. So.
And just, you brought up a really good point about trust. And I don't want to say too much about sourcing, but there were phone calls I was able to make where, to people where I do have good relationships with them. I've got long relationships with them where they did trust that if they wanted to keep something confidential, of course I was going to keep it confidential. And if they didn't want to be involved at all, I wouldn't involve them at all. It's hard to just cold call people and ask them about really bad things that are happening because they don't know what you're going to do with their information. So Yeah, beat reporting, it's the greatest.
So we're going to hear more about dirty schools. Like, this isn't the end, right? Because
No.
you've obviously after your first story, you had a couple stories, as I mentioned earlier.
Right.
It's not over, right?
No.
You still have a lot more to say about this subject.
I mean, I do because the story like still has a long way to go. I mean, here's another kooky quirk in this whole thing. It's not even a quirk. It's probably just how Chicago Public Schools operates. But you know, they had a company overseeing just the cleaning in the schools that got the blitz inspections, and then about a year and a half ago, they turned over so much more responsibility and more schools to the same company. Mm-hmm. So that program is about to like get underway fully on July 1st, and then this company is going to be in charge of like everything facilities at I'm trying to remember how many schools and I'm going blank, but at a ton of the schools. So they'll be in charge of the pest control and the landscaping and the cleaning and repairs and things. So I mean, those are questions I have for CPS now. I mean, how is it that you're giving more responsibility to this company that has struggled to deliver what you wanted them to in the first place, just with cleaning?
Well, I'm looking forward to the stories, and I'm sure
Me too.
Many readers are too. So
I
thanks
hope
for
so.
talking to me.
No, I hope so, and please call.